Hello and welcome to the Nourished Kitchen. I wanted to show you today a very simple recipe that you can make for lunch or dinner. Pizza. Everybody loves pizza, but we're going to demo a plant-based pizza for you today using portobello mushrooms. So I want to first show you the ingredients here and walk you through the recipe. So a lot of people have a hard time making healthy meals at home because they get all bound up with the prep and the food prep. So I just want to show you how simple it could be. And so we're going to use a process called mise en place, and that just means everything in place before you begin. But the first thing that you want to do is just to know, what do you need? So when you're starting with a recipe, always read through the entire recipe, read through what ingredients that you need, and then have as much as you can prepped before you begin the cooking process. So for today's recipe, we're using these delicious large portobello mushroom tops. And I've got 6 of them, which will make 6 mini pizzas. And then of course with pizzas, you can use any topping that you desire. So I've got some red bell pepper, some yellow bell pepper, got a zucchini here, yellow squash, some broccoli. I even got a mixed green mix. So we've got some kale in here, mizuna, some baby Swiss chard, and baby spinach. And we've got some beautiful colored grape tomatoes. So those add a lot of color. The more color you have on the dish, the more nutrients you have in your food. We've got some broccoli shreds here, and just some ordinary pizza sauce. So a lot of times I'll do a red pizza sauce, or I even like to just use a pesto. Pesto is another great sauce that can be used. For the additional toppings, you can use things that are jarred. So I've got some mild banana pepper rings. We've got some fermented cabbage kraut. And so this just adds a nice crunch and then a dimension of probiotics for the meal as well. And then to keep it plant-based, we want to use plant-based cheese. People have a hard time with that because plant-based cheese isn't really cheese, but that's the whole idea, is that we are trying to keep it as low inflammatory as possible. So Daya makes these great alternatives. This is a cheddar and mozzarella style blend, and this is a spicy Monterey Jack style. And you can really use any plant-based cheese that's out there. There's other brands. This is just one that is that's available to me, and it melts, so it works nice on a pizza. And then I've got this nice, just like Parmesan, and again, this is a plant-based. I believe it's potato starch, and it's got some tapioca in it, and coconut and salt, and then flavors as well. So pretty simple, but it shreds and has that flavor of Parmesan cheese. And then we're going to be using, for seasonings, we're going to be using just a dried basil, dried oregano, and then we're going to be using a dried garlic powder as well. So very, very simple. Almost everyone has these in their pantry. And if you didn't have the individual basil and oregano, you can always use a dried Italian seasoning. We're going to be using a little bit of olive oil to prep the mushrooms. And then I've got herbs. Herbs are always great to add on to foods. So herbs they add more nutrients to the dish, but they also add great, rich flavor. These are best to be used as a garnish and not cooked into the food, but they add the delicious flavor at the end. Okay, so the other things that we can put on, basically anything that you put on a normal pizza, you can put on. So I don't have any meat on here, but it doesn't mean that you can't put meat on these. You could put sliced sausage on there, you could put a little bit of chicken. It's really up to you. The idea is, when we're eating healthy, is that we get 80% of the plate filled with plants and nutrient-dense foods. And then we use meat as a condiment. But in this dish, we're not going to use any at all. We're going to have these delicious vegan, vegetarian-based pizzas. So the first thing that you want to do, like I said, is to get everything ready. And the very first thing is to prep your mushrooms. So the mushrooms, I'm just going to put these on the board solo. If you wash mushrooms, they get slimy, so that's really not the best thing to do. But a lot of times when you get mushrooms, they grow low to the ground and they will have dirt or mud on them. And so you can just take a paper towel and just wipe the top of them clean. Pretty simple process, and it doesn't have to be perfect. If you grew up in the same age as me, it's a little bit of dirt don't hurt. And it's got some nutrients in there as well. So we're just gonna wipe the top of the mushrooms, and you don't wanna damage them, but just wipe off any muddy spots. And on the base of the mushrooms, we're gonna do a little bit of prep too, because portobello mushrooms have large, what are called gills, and also the stems can be quite woody tasting. So we want to remove the stems. I'm gonna walk you through that process. Now for this recipe, I have preheated the oven to 400 degrees, and we're gonna do a little pre-cook before you do the actual cook on the mushrooms. So to prep the mushrooms, move some of this out of our way. We want to remove the stem and remove the gills. And so the reason why you want to remove the gills it's all edible. I mean, you don't have to. I've done things with the gills and without, but the gills themselves can turn the food black and make it a little bit slimy. So if you just want to have a nice firm pizza, then this is what we're going to do. So we're just going to cut that stem first. And then with a large spoon, you're just going to scrape the inside of the mushroom and remove the gills. And you know, you could very well save this gill and put it in some warm water, make a little bit of a mushroom tea out of it, and then use that for vegetable broth or put it into your soup. Doesn't have to be wasted. You could put the whole thing into a hot dish or a soup and still get the benefits there. So just simple, just removing the gills like so. So mushrooms are a wonderful food to add into your diet for several reasons. One of the key reasons is that mushrooms are one of the only foods, or the only food that I'm aware of, that has vitamin D in the food itself. And vitamin D is essential for so many things in the body, but helping the immune system to stay strong, helping your bones. Right now, when we think about fighting off diseases, vitamin D is key, especially if you live as far north as we do here in Alaska. So you can see when we remove this, we've got a great base to start building little pizzas. You can use a paring knife for this too. And when you're doing this as well, you don't have to scrape hard at all. It's really quite light, just rubbing the gills off the mushrooms. So this is probably the hardest part of the prep, and you can see it's not that hard at all. The other thing about this is that if you have kids in the home, this would be a fun little job that they could do and be a part of the meal. So a lot of times, we hear the complaints that our kids won't eat healthy foods, but if you get them involved in the food and meal making process, they're more vested, and the chances of them eating the healthy food are going to be much higher. So the other thing about mushrooms is that they have essential minerals that are great for the body, and they actually help to transport fat through the body. So not all the fat that we eat in our foods is stored. So mushrooms help with the metabolism of fat. So in a sense, they're a great diet food. I was so carefully removing that stem. And our last one. So another thing that you could do if you didn't want to buy these large mushroom caps is you can buy the smaller ones and make mini pizzas, little pizza bites, which would be fun for parties or just a, movie night. Fun little bite-sized snacks. When you're purchasing mushrooms, you want to make sure that you're looking in the package and making sure that there's no mold on the mushrooms and that they don't look wet. You want them to look dry. If they look like they're wet in the package or that you see a lot of brown spots, they're starting to go bad. And the one thing about mushrooms is that if you eat them raw and they're starting to turn, you might potentially be consuming mold. And if you have any issues with candida whatsoever, mushrooms are a mold carrier, and that can be kind of tough on digestion and the stomach. All right, so those guys are all prepped. And we're just going to take a couple cookie sheets that we have that are lined with parchment paper and get the mushrooms on there. So like I said, the oven is preheated to 400 degrees. And we're just going to do a par bake for 5 minutes in the oven. So I'm just going to get a little bit of olive oil and you can use a pastry brush. You can use your fingers if you want. And we'll just brush these guys with a little bit of olive oil. You want to do both sides, and you don't need a lot, honestly. We're just looking to crisp it up a little bit. So portobellos, you can also do these on the grill, not for pizza, but I've grilled these big tops before and then use them for hamburger buns or, plant-based burger buns. So they're quite versatile. They taste delicious. Do just a little bit more. Okay, so again, this is going to make 6 mini pizzas. 1 for each. Great news about this though, is if you decided you wanted to have 2, it's all plant-based. It's not a lot of calories. So it's great to pair it with something. This today is probably going to be paired with like a roasted cauliflower dish. Something with just a little more texture, a little more flavor on the side. Could be paired with a nice salad as well. So these are going to go in the oven now for 5 minutes. Make sure your racks are in the right place. So while that's going, let's go ahead and get the vegetables all ready for what we're going to do. So I'll show you a couple different techniques that you can do for these. Because we've got mini pizzas, we want to have mini vegetables to put on top. And I like to pull in as much color as I can. So like I said, I have a couple bell peppers. This is just a very easy way to cut a bell pepper. Cut the bottom off, make sure your stem is cut. Then you can see right down inside where the seeds are. A lot of times when people are cutting bell peppers, they'll start just chopping and then seeds are all over the board and they gotta wash everything. So this is just a very simple way. You're gonna take your knife at an angle, protecting your fingers and cutting away from the bell pepper, but cutting off the pith, and that's that white part right there. And we're just gonna do this all the way around the bell pepper. Just being careful for your fingers. Okay, and then your seeds and your top are all together and you just toss that right in the trash. So less mess on the board. Now, if you want to do a little bit more cleaning up of the bell pepper, you can come along carefully, you know, and just do a straight cut and cut that pith off. But you don't have to be that fancy. You can actually just use your fingers too and just scrape that white pith that comes right out of the bell pepper. Don't think you got to be fancy in the kitchen. The idea is that you get in there and you're just preparing your own food. And the more you're invested in the preparation, the more you'll feel good about eating the food. So we're going to take the bell pepper and we're just going to do a fine dice to this. So it may seem sensible to put shiny side up, but it actually cuts harder that way. So we want to do shiny side down, protecting your fingers again. And we're going to do just some thin julienne cuts. And then crossways, and we'll just do some small dice. Now, if you get in the kitchen and you get having a good time cutting up too much, don't worry about it. Use what you the extra in salads or in soups. Don't toss stuff. Okay, and I'm probably going to use about half of the red bell pepper and half of the yellow. Now I'm using a chef knife here, and a sharp knife in the kitchen is going to be one of your best friends. A dull knife makes chopping difficult, and it makes food prep monotonous. So having a nice sharp knife and just getting used to using it, you're going to have a much better time in the kitchen. Do the same thing with our yellow bell pepper. So bell peppers have enough, or I should say, a day's worth of vitamin C in about a quarter of a bell pepper. But the thing about vitamin C is that it's water soluble. And so you could eat a day's worth of vitamin C in one meal, but your body's only going to use what it needs. So using these throughout the day in different meals, great things. Just making sure you have good sources of vitamin C. So same thing, we're just going to cut some julienne strips of the bell pepper. Yep. And rotate those guys. Okay, so whenever you're eating, when you sit down to eat, take a peek at your meal and see, do you have color on the plate? So the idea is that we get at least 3 colors on the plate every time we sit down to eat, and then we know we're getting all the nutrients, or a lot of the nutrients that your body needs. We're gonna do a little bit of broccoli, and I'm just using the florets for this, and you really don't need a lot. We're gonna try to cut these into really small pieces because they are small pizzas, right? And we don't want a big piece of raw broccoli on there and other cooked vegetables. So I'm just doing a kind of just a rough chop to make the small mini florets, we'll say. And we're not going to use a lot of this either, just a little bit of broccoli on each one. All right, there's our pizzas are ready. So you'll know that these guys are par cooked when you see that they're just starting to soften, and that's exactly what you want. And so I'm going to set these aside, and then we're going to prep these as soon as we get the rest of our vegetables ready. Okay, so we'll finish our broccoli. I've also got some broccoli shreds, giving another texture to it, another look to it. So this you can just buy right in the store, right? So this has some purple cabbage in it, some carrots, and some broccoli shreds. So that's another thing where you don't have to do a lot of food. The prep's already done for you. And I've got these grape tomatoes. So with the grape tomatoes, I like to just cut them in half and really use them. I like to use them as a garnish at the end of cooking. But if you like tomatoes cooked, then you also can cook with them. In this instance, we're going to do both. We're going to use some on the tomato, and then we're going to garnish with some as well. I love these tomatoes because they're very sweet. They're kid-friendly. You can use these with your kids. They don't have the bitterness that some other tomatoes have. They really are very sweet. They're like a sweet treat. Okay, and then we're going to take a little bit of our greens, and we'll just chop these a little bit. You can put them on their whole too, but we want to be able to see all the different things that we're putting on the pizza. So in here we have baby Swiss chard, kale, spinach, loaded with vitamin C, vitamin A, lots of nutrients, lots of fiber, and that's what we want for being healthy in the body. We want to make sure that we get a variety. I'm going to add on some green onions. I could do white onions, red onions, whatever you have. I have these green onions that are going to add a lot of flavor, but not too potent. Especially again, if we're trying this with the family members and there are some that are like, oh, I don't like onions. These give a nice flavor without overpowering the dish. And so I just cut off the dried ends, and I'm going to do a very thin slice to these. And we're not going to add tons of mushrooms to it, but I want to get the tops and the bottoms. So I'm going to save this for later, and then just go ahead and cut the bottom of the mushrooms, or I'm sorry, the onions, not mushrooms. So the cool thing about these, if you wanted to, you could take your little bottoms and you could put them in dirt, in soil, and they will grow a brand new onion in your kitchen. So we can keep our gardens going all year round. All right, so we've got our onions, we've got our sauce, and the last thing I want to prep is just a little bit of the cheese. So I'm going to use some of this Parmesan cheese. I've already got the other two, or I bought them shredded, but I just like to use a little bit of this for topping. So this is a fine grater. And we might do some more after. But this is mise en place. We have everything in place. Everything's ready to start assembling our pizza. So let's go ahead and start that process. Well, I think it's not too hot, so we're just going to put this right here. Okay, so to begin the process, just like building any other pizza, right? We want to start with the sauce. So for about 6 pizzas, you want to have 2 cups of sauce. And again, this is just regular pizza sauce. Fresh basil would be delicious in here as well. So you could put some fresh basil inside with the sauce. But not everybody always has the fresh stuff, so that's why we're going to use the dried. Because generally everybody has Italian seasoning in their cupboard, or some sort of dried basil and oregano. You can be the judge on how much sauce you want to put on these pizzas. Like it really saucy, add more. And I'll show you a variety that we can do too. This is my favorite way of doing it. I just love to add a little bit of basil, or pesto basil, I should say. So I'm going to make one of these pesto pizza. Now, just disclaimer here that this is not vegan when you use this type of pesto because it does have a dairy in it. But you can make your own pesto quite simply at home. But I'm showing you the quick and easy way to pop together these pizzas today. All right, so we've got one pesto and the rest we'll do with our red sauce. The great thing is that once we get this assembled, these will finish cooking in about 10 minutes time. So if you get some help in the kitchen assembling these pizzas, you can have dinner on the table in about 30 minutes. And that's fantastic. All right, and then just start dressing your pizza. So we've got our vitamin C going on there. We're gonna add in onions. One thing about onions that I didn't share is that onions have a phytonutrient called allicin. And allicin is known to prevent cancer, to fight off cancer that might be in the body and to prevent cells from actually growing and becoming cancerous. So it's a wonderful nutrient to add in, and it's in all onions and garlic. Okay, before I get going too crazy with all my veggies, I want to go ahead and add in the seasonings on here too. So we're going to very simply just sprinkle our seasonings on here. And so I've got some oregano and I've got the parsley, or I'm sorry, the basil. So an easy way that you can do this is just to mix these together. So I'm going to kind of do a heaping half teaspoon of the oregano and a heaping half teaspoon of the dried basil. And I'm going to do the same with our garlic powder. And then you're just going to mix this together. Now, if you want, and I'm going to add just a little bit, you could do this with no salt whatsoever. But I'm going to add just a little bit of salt in here as well. I like to use a sea salt. So I'm just going to do about a half of a teaspoon. Mix all that together. If you wanted some red peppers, you could do some red peppers in there, give it a little bit more kick. And then we'll just sprinkle our seasonings around on the pizzas. And this is enough for all 6, so don't be afraid to be a little generous. What you'll find is that pizza base, the mushroom pizza base, is really meaty. And it's nice and filling. It's very dense, but delicious. All right, so we've got our seasonings on there, and we'll just keep throwing our toppings on. So I'm going to do some of the greens. Now, some of you are like, where's the cheese? We're going to add it. But the idea of this is that we want to make sure we're getting enough of the veggies on there so that we're getting a nice nutrient-dense meal, and we're not just having a cheese pizza. Okay, so we'll add some varieties of the cheese. This will hold the veggies on. This cheese does melt, which is great. That sounds weird, but some vegan cheeses, when they first came out, didn't melt as well. So they've come up with the great recipes now. The kitchen science. I'm going to add both different kinds to this. So we'll add some of this cheddar mix, and then we'll add some of the spicy cheese on there as well. And it smells delicious. Those spices on the pizza make it smell really good. And then we'll just add in some more of your color, some more of your toppings. Don't be afraid to be generous. This is dinner. So what I'm going to do is, after these are cooked, then we will top with the fresh cilantro on there. and probably a few more slices of tomato. Pop your colors. We eat with our eyes first, so the more color you have on there, the better. And then a little sprinkle of the parm on top. And that's it. That's as simple as these pizzas go together. They go into the oven for an additional 10 minutes at 400 degrees. And you've got a delicious dinner ready for your family, kid-friendly, all age friendly, and loaded with nutrients. So thank you for joining me in the kitchen.